Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be talking about key changes and emerging trends in EcoVadis. My name is Preston. I am on the business development team and the EcoVadis team at 3R Sustainability. While we let people join, I'm gonna launch a poll and get to hear a bit about the audience and your next EcoVadis submission. And I'll also let my colleague Josh introduce himself. So please interact with the poll, and Josh, say hello.
Yeah, thanks, Preston. Thanks, everyone, for joining. My name is Josh Knupp. I'm a senior manager here at 3R Sustainability. And my primary responsibility at the company is to oversee our EcoVadis service line. So what that means is supporting dozens of companies every year with their assessments, their improvement plans, and helping them meet the goals that they're looking to achieve. So today we'll primarily be focused on the key changes within EcoVadis, but we'll get a bit more into that here shortly. I'll give it a minute, and thanks for completing the poll. It's very interesting to see where everyone's at in the journey.
Yeah, we got a pretty even split right now. Looks like about half of you have voted, so we'll leave it open a little bit more. If you're just joining us, it'd be great if you could fill out the poll so we have a good understanding of who's in the audience today. Okay, maybe about 10 more seconds. About 60% voted. All right, final ask. I'm about to shut down the poll, share the results. Okay, so pretty even split. It looks like most people in the next kind of 3 to 12 months, and a few people for the first time submission. So thanks for joining us today. All right, if you go to the next slide. Awesome. So before we dive into the content, I just want to give us a little bit of background on who we are. We're 3R Sustainability. We're a full-service sustainability consulting firm and an accredited consulting partner with EcoVadis. We support companies globally on their EcoVadis submission and related improvements, which is a full suite of services, everything from sustainability reporting to embedding a management system into your company that really manages your sustainability risks and opportunities. We also have a climate team that works on decarbonization efforts and also things like greenhouse gas emissions calculations and product carbon footprints in the products and packaging part of the climate space. We also have a built environment team. So for those of you who have a physical building footprint, the built environment team supports decarbonization and energy efficiency and also green building certifications for the built environment. Another thing I want to shout out is our assurance division. So you'll see on the left we have two logos, 3R and SAS, which is Sustainability Assurance Services. They support with third-party data validation and assurance. So for those of you who are deep in the EcoVadis world, you may know that to get higher on the reporting score, you need third-party assurance. They can help with that. I think that's mostly what's relevant today. We're also proud Women-Owned Business B Corp, and we support with CDP as well, which leads on to our great webinar series. We have an upcoming CDP Scoring Essentials webinar next week. So if you also have to do CDP, that's a really nice pair with this webinar to just kind of prepare for the rest of the voluntary reporting of the year. For those of you in the packaging supply chain, we have an upcoming webinar also on packaging compliance related to sustainability. All our webinars are free, complimentary, and open to the public. So you can follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe to our newsletter. I think by joining today, you're probably auto-enrolled in there, so you'll get information on our upcoming webinars. Next one. Okay, so today we're going to focus on, like I said, key updates for EcoVadis in 2026 and just kind of seeing the trends that we're seeing along our client base, and also more generally, we have a really close partnership with EcoVadis, so they let us know what's going on in the world. And then we'll really bring it down to practical tips. So I'm sure you can read any newsletter or see what they put out online, but 3R as a consultant is able to support with practical tips. It's really nice to work with a third party because we can give you a bit more insight into what you can do. There's some regulation in the EU that's really limiting um, people like EcoVadis in giving tips. So always nice to do that. And then we will have a Q&A. So you can ask Josh any questions throughout. And at the end, if it makes sense to stop the presentation, I'll kind of butt in and ask that question. But we'll also have time at the end. Before we jump into the content, though, a second poll. If y'all would be so kind to participate, we'd be curious to hear about your current EcoVadis maturity. Thank you so much.
And while you complete this, I know Preston mentioned putting in questions and comments into the chat, and I want to emphasize, please do that. We try to tailor this to be as useful for the audience as possible, but that is a bit of a guessing game, as you could suspect. So please put anything you want to know in the chat and in the comments, and we'll do the best we can to respond to that today. If we don't have an answer for you today, we'll get one for you and follow up. So please be sure to do that.
Yeah.
And that is a big part of why we do the polls too, trying to tailor this presentation to the audience.
Yeah, so I think you can use the chat or the Q&A box. For me, it's on the upper right. I don't know if on the desktop or the internet version it's the same, but put your stuff in there, and if it's super specific, we'll follow up one-on-one, but otherwise, try to answer it widely. Okay, we got about half the group voting so far. Give it a couple seconds. Sounds like most people are in the multiple submissions, so maybe a few years in, improving with about 20% aiming for an advanced score. All right, 10 seconds. Answer now or forever have us wonder about your maturity. Okay, so about half with multiple submissions. Share those results now. Thanks for participating. I'm going to hand over the mic to Josh to talk about updates, and I'll be back in a bit to bug you with more polls.
Thanks, Preston. All right, so diving into the core content here. So I want to start off just with some trends that we're seeing. This is both from our experience from this past year, what we're seeing for 2026, but also is informed by the updates that EcoVadis is putting out actively and has over the past few months. So 3 trends to boil it down to. One, likely this group has seen, but performance thresholds are rising across the market. And we'll get into this more on the next slide. But EcoVadis, when they move to percentile-based, the metal methodology, it is increasingly important to show continuous improvement in your sustainability program and your sustainability journey. And therefore, with your EcoVadis submission, to maintain your metals or to reach the next level that you're striving for. Second one, scoring is becoming more transparent and granular. For those that have submitted over the past several years, you've likely seen a lot of the improvements, a lot of the intentionality that EcoVadis has put forward with the scorecard. There's a lot more granularity than there used to be. I remember working on EcoVadis assessments about 5 or 6 years ago, and there was very little in the form of corrective actions, and it was hard to know how to prioritize your time and resources. So that is, I think, become very apparent in recent years that is enhancing, and we'll talk about some of those improvements in this presentation. And then the third one, just an overarching theme here, is the assessments. This has always been a focus of EcoVadis's, but I think it really has become additionally part of the consideration about having regulation-driven and risk-driven scoring methodology, questionnaire methodology, and really aligning the questionnaire with the most applicable regulations that we're seeing. Again, we'll talk a little bit more on that one here soon. So diving into the metal methodology, so in 2024, EcoVadis did make the shift to the percentile-based scoring, which you can see here on the right side with the platinum is top 1%, bronze is top 35%. Likely not a surprise. But what is becoming increasingly evident is that the threshold is rising faster almost every year. So what you can see in this graphic is where the approximate score threshold is as of right now. To achieve platinum, you're looking at a score of 86 out of 100, moving down 79, 75, 64, moving from platinum to bronze. So this is a pretty dramatic increase compared to what we were seeing about this time in 2025. So on average, it does vary a little bit depending on the metal threshold, but we're seeing about a 3-point annual increase to achieve the same metal year over year. So for example, to achieve a gold in 2025, that may have been, that was looking at around a 76, and now we're looking at a score of 79. So I mentioned that it's all about that continuous improvement. And I think that really matches the ethos of EcoVadis, is using the tool, using the questionnaire as a way to identify action areas, opportunities for improvement, and then taking on those actions throughout the year and then reassessing and seeing where you fall. I do have to note these are not provided by EcoVadis anymore, but this is purely based on our own benchmarking and knowledge. So these scores may not be perfectly accurate. Okay, so moving into the questionnaire updates. So a few things to note here. This is a little bit of at a higher level with the questionnaire. The first one I want to note is the VSME incorporation. So EcoVadis did incorporate VSME as an accepted reporting standard in 2025, but one of the updates here is they've made a methodology differentiation between VSME basic and the comprehensive module. So you'll see the scoring impacts there with the basics. Basic is a score 75 out of 100 in the reporting indicator, and then the comprehensive is 100. So just a kind of an update that is important for a subset of you, I suspect. The second point, there is a new climate physical risk question, which you can see a screenshot of that on the right. So has your company implemented, what has your company done to address climate physical risks? You can see the options there. I did want to note this is an unscored question right now, so it has no impact on your overall score, but it is an important step, I would say, for sharing the maturity of your carbon management and your climate risk readiness to your customers. And then this last one I wanted to point out is there's an enhanced help content section, and this is across all themes, all questions, and there's a screenshot of it here where you can press this show more button, which this has existed for several years now, where the enhancement has become is to provide a lot more detail on what examples of documents you can attach and what EcoVadis is looking for. This has been rolled out slowly, I would say, where you may have seen this increased level of detail on certain questions, maybe not others, but we're really seeing this more broadly kind of across all of the questions now. So I do recommend, if there's any uncertainty in the past about filling out, completing a certain question, you may see additional information, additional content, additional guidance that you may not have had before. So I do recommend taking a look at that. Additional questionnaire change. There's been some updates to the labor and human rights theme. So I think this top point really summarizes it here. EcoVadis is strengthening how companies are evaluated on labor and human rights, especially with this alignment on CS Um, so they're with the expanded focus on young worker protections and recruitment practices. So to touch on that in a little bit more detail, there is a new self-declaration question that you'll see, especially when it comes to child labor. So you'll be asked a question now: does your company employ young workers who are of legal working age in your jurisdiction but are under 18 years old? So you'll have the option to select yes, no, or I don't know. And depending on your response there, you may have additional questions. So if you respond yes, you'll be asked about what actions your company is putting forward to protect young workers. So that's a very tactical change you may be seeing soon. And then this last point on employee turnover, this is employee turnover. This is primarily impacting the reporting indicator. You can report on employee turnover, and that'll now count under the working conditions key sustainability issue. So if you were having difficulties in the past meeting your labor and human rights reporting indicators goals, this may be an opportunity to utilize the employee turnover that you may not have been able to use in the past. Okay, so into 360 Watch, there has been, I think, a pretty noteworthy change here. The change, EcoVadis is calling it the stakeholder consensus. So historically, EcoVadis has been looking for really any news or violations that came across for 360 Watch across all 4 themes. One thing that they're adding now is they're adding a consideration for credibility of the sources and what's the uh, is there an actual negative impact that's been identified. So this is most significant when you're looking at um, issues that are in the very early stage of being identified, and they don't have a finalized resolution to them yet. So there may be less of an impact because the real less of an impact on your score because it's not clear on what the overall impact is on society or the environment. So it's really addressing a gray area that EcoVadis hadn't been considering in the past, and with the goal being really to not over or under penalize a company based on unclear cases. Okay, to get into some product updates, something that you'll be seeing here very soon. This is actually a really new release, just as March 10th. So I actually haven't seen what this looks like quite yet, but there is going to be a new mapping to ESG pillars, where historically EcoVadis has operated under the 4 themes: environment, labor and human rights, ethics, and sustainable procurement. But there is now going to be a mapping to environment, social, and governance. Like I said, haven't seen what this looks like in practice yet, but that will be under the My Performance section of your scorecard. I'm excited to see what this looks like. And then the second point here, EcoVadis has been working on this for a little bit, and we've kind of been getting bits and pieces of information on it. But it's official that the new product carbon footprint calculator, PCF calculator, is live now. There's a screenshot of it to the right. It can be found under, again, My Performance and then the carbon product data button. So if you go in, add new product, you can get a PCF. So if any of your customers are asking about that for a specific product, you now have that available to you. I will note this is only in place for 12 industrial sectors. So this is covering manufactured goods, specifically with plastics and metals, also electronics and machinery. So if you fall out of scope of that, it may not be overly useful for you yet, but I know EcoVadis is prioritizing adding in additional industries. But feel free to check that out. It's kind of fun to play around with the different inputs there. Okay, Another product update that I'm particularly excited about, I showed a before and after here. So this is actually from the same scorecard from one year to the next year, and I wanted to show where the difference is. And I mentioned earlier about how EcoVadis is intentionally trying to become more specific, more granular with their recommendations, and I think this is a really clear example of it. So in 2025, this company scored a 50 on their sustainable procurement policy score. And you can see what the strengths were: standard policy on sustainable procurement issues, but there was no recommendations for improvement. So I think this led for many companies a lack of clarity on how to improve. The score is 50, but there's no recommendations for improvement. So fast forward that into 2026, you can see still a score of 50. The strengths are relatively similar. There's one additional strength, but now you're getting really good insight into where the gaps are. So for this particular case, their EcoVadis calls them formalization elements. They want to see these within policies. They want to see that there's a review mechanism. They want to see that there's a scope of what the policy, who the policy applies to, and then also who oversees that policy, the dedicated responsibility for the policy. So these gaps, I think, are much more clear now, and can really help guide companies in a lot better way. And this is just one example, but EcoVadis is working on this really holistically. So this is a policy example, but there also is going to be increased insight into measures and reporting really across all of the different indicators within EcoVadis. All right, and then just some quick updates. I'll start with the one on the right here. The EcoVadis community is live. For those that aren't familiar with this, it is a space for companies that are completing EcoVadis to go and get resources, get information. There's, as you can see, there's a resource library. There's many events that are happening, some of them live, some of them are recordings. And there's also forums. So if you have any questions that come up when you're completing the assessment or you're preparing for the assessment, you can go in and ask the community to help with those questions. So I think it's going to be a really great resource. I believe it is available to everyone. The best way to access this is once you sign into your portal. On the very left side, there's the banner. At the bottom of that, there's a button for EcoVadis community. So I recommend everyone go in there, check it out, see what everyone is sharing and all the different resources. It is fairly new, so I expect this community to continue to grow pretty dramatically. Looks like when I took this screenshot, there was just over 1,000 members and 457 posts. So I expect that to grow quite a bit here. It is currently only available in English, just as a note. And then on the left here, this is a new update that EcoVadis announced via email a couple of months ago, but when it comes to sharing your medals and your badges, EcoVadis is adding another layer of credibility to sharing those medals. So to avoid companies having a medal and maybe not submitting again, or maybe stealing another medal from a different company, this is really just a way to prevent that. So they're asking that anytime you're sharing, they're actually mandating anytime that you're sharing your medal, you also include the EcoVadis recognition page. So there, I put in the red here, there's a link that you can get access to this. There's also a code that you can add to your website. But anytime you're sharing the medal, be sure to also add in that link. This can be found under, again, on that left side banner after you sign in. There's a button for useful resources, and this is one of the sections for sharing your medal. So be sure to update that in any of your marketing materials. Okay, I will take a pause here. We're going to get into some top recommendations for 2026. But Preston, please launch the next poll.
I'm back with a poll. Okay. want to ask everyone about their biggest challenges with EcoVadis, so we kind of make sure we address any of those concerns for the end. And I will say we don't have very many questions, everyone. So if this sparked anything for you, or if there's anything we didn't address and you're curious about it, please ask questions. This is a really great resource. As you can see during the presentation, Josh knows his stuff and is deep in the EcoVadis methodology. So any questions you have would be great. Okay, so looks like a lot of people are feeling stress around understanding the evidence that's required. That is relatable. I think a lot of our clients come to us with so much in their platform, but it's like not the right evidence. And obviously we can address that on a case-by-case basis. But if you ever have any specifics about what might be good for a question, there's of course guidance from EcoVadis, but sometimes it's not super clear if you don't have the exact item they're looking for. Okay, looks like we got 60%. I'll leave it up for a few more seconds.
I'm seeing here also one of the main topics is improving our score. So I think if there are any specific questions to that, please drop those in the chat and we can address those. So yeah, I think this is hopefully sparks some questions, as Preston alluded to.
Okay, sharing the results now. Great. Okay, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Preston. When I was prepping for this, for kind of what are the top recommendations for 2026, I wanted to be as specific and practical as I could for this forum. So that's what this attempt is here. And I think the best way to do that is to do a breakdown of the different indicators. I maybe should have started with this, but the indicators are the 7 indicators when you look at your scoring. On the left side there, they're also the structure of the questionnaire. When you open it, it's the next level down in the hierarchy from the themes, the 4 themes. So each of the 4 themes has 7 indicators. And we'll get into several of them here. So I note these 2, policies and reporting, because I think these tend to be the quickest wins to see the biggest score improvement in pretty quickly. So starting with policies, a few recommendations that I have for you when you're thinking about your policies is make sure that your commitments and your documentation are aligned with the key sustainability issues for your industry. Something that we find with a lot of our clients coming to us for the first time is that there is a lack of awareness of what topics EcoVadis is assessing them on. So that's really my first piece of recommendation is make sure that you know what topics are being scored, what key sustainability issues are being scored. And you can find that in your industry profile. Again, go to My Performance, and at the top there's your industry link. If you click that, it'll open up and show the weighting for each of your key sustainability issues and which ones are applicable for you. So make sure you know that. And then once you identify those key issues, the next step is making sure that your policies align with those issues, those topics. And having commitment-based language, whether it be qualitative or quantitative commitment, EcoVadis really wants to see those commitment-based clauses in your documentation. The best example of this, one of the most common gaps that we see with this is if a company is looking to have a policy on working conditions, a lot of the times we see companies use their employee handbook, which is totally acceptable and a great piece of evidence to use. But most of the time when they're talking about work conditions, it's about wages and working hours. A lot of the times the language in there is about what the company is doing. rather than the commitment to doing something. Kind of what are you striving to do? So that's something to really keep in mind is you want it to be commitment. What are you striving to do rather than what are you doing? The what are you doing is applicable for the measures indicator, which is very important as well. But we do see a gap there sometimes. The second one about formalization elements, I mentioned these earlier. Historically, this is much more difficult to identify because the scorecard wasn't as transparent on what was missing. But now with the new updates, be sure to take another look and you may see the very specific formalization elements that you're missing for policies. And these are instrumental into scoring the top scores within the policy indicator. So be sure you have your formalization elements in there. And then the last one, and this is so critical for your score, is having time-bound quantitative targets. So as I mentioned before, EcoVadis wants to see what you're striving for. The quantitative portion of that is really critical to getting scores in the 75 and 100 in the policy indicator. For most of the themes, without having quantitative targets, you are capped at a score of 50. So if you want to get to those top ones, you have to have quantitative targets in place. When you're thinking about setting quantitative targets, you want to make sure that they're time bound so that they have an end date is what that means. Also has to be something that you haven't achieved already. So if you already have 0 incidents for something, you can't set a target to have 0 incidents of that in 2027 because that's already been achieved. You won't get credit for it from EcoVadis. And then second, moving over to reporting. This first one is very similar as the policy the first point there. Make sure that your KPIs are aligned with the key sustainability issues. So as the first check for the EcoVadis analyst, they want to see that you have a metric, you have a KPI for each of the key sustainability issues that have been assigned to your company. So that's the first check. Make sure you have a metric for each of them. The second, similar to I mentioned the quantitative targets, having a public standard aligned report. So earlier I talked about VSME, but there's also GRI, SASB, IFRS. There's tons of different standards you could align your report to, but your score is capped here if you don't have a public report. Again, capped at a score of 50. So be sure to, if it's in your budget, if it's in your resources to produce a report, that is a really big way to improve your score. And then third one, this is a common error that we see with clients that come to this the first time, is when they're looking at the reporting indicator, they'll provide documentation about, again, more on the measures, what they're doing, rather than the data behind it. So an example of this would be you get a question about employees, the percent of employees that have a performance review completed. What we'll often see is a company will upload the document of the template that they use for performance reviews. And then in the comments, they'll say 100% of our employees have a performance review. But this won't get accepted by EcoVadis because the data itself is not within the document. So highly recommend having your data centralized in a way, whether it be an external report, but even if it's just an internal report. We call it a management review deck for a lot of our clients. If you're putting together kind of a centralized place of all of your sustainability data, it's a way to report to your internal company, but it also is a really good piece of evidence for EcoVadis. Moving into 3 additional ones. It's endorsements. I'll keep this one pretty short, but I do recommend really, this is such a quick look that I think is overlooked many times, but take a look at your company website and see if there are any endorsements or affiliations that your company is a part of. And there may be an opportunity to utilize those as an endorsement. The endorsement is an external commitment to a recognized sustainability initiative or organization, something like that. So maybe also ask some stakeholders around your organization, see if there's any organizations that you partner with that you may not be aware of. A lot of the times there are these partnerships and commitments that the person completing the assessment may not be aware of. So just take a wider look there. Measures, kind of similar to the key sustainability issues. Make sure that you are looking at each of the key sustainability issues and identifying where there are gaps in your what you're getting accepted for measures. So in general, EcoVadis wants to see 4 accepted measures for each of the key sustainability issues. So you could think of a measure as when you check the box within that indicator, how many of those are getting accepted. So if you're not getting 4 accepted, that may be an opportunity to really help you prioritize on a specific topic or a specific initiative. Another thing is to leverage EcoVadis's resources. There is a pretty extensive training database, I'll call it, within EcoVadis. So you can really meet a lot of those training questions that EcoVadis asks about utilizing that training. So if you want to do sustainable procurement, you want to have your procurement team, your buyers go through that. That is very well available to your team. So be sure to utilize that. The EcoVadis Academy is what they call it. Okay, then moving into coverage. Coverage is only applicable to large companies, but it is when it is applicable, it has a very high impact on your score. So for large companies, this is a very important indicator for you to be considering. It's also the most complicated. So I'll try to keep this fairly high level, but they break it into proxies, as you can see here. You could think of proxies as different, the different questions they're asking, always quantitative here. And there's different groupings of them, different priority levels. So the highest priority, for example, would be if you have any certifications. So you could think of like ISO 14001. That would be the highest priority. So that's what EcoVadis is looking at first. But be sure to complete as many of those questions as you can. Provide as much data as you can, because there are multipliers built in if you're able to respond to more questions there. And then lastly, I think this point is not very well known, but having third-party assurance of your data or your sustainability report, whatever it may be, can be a boost to your score in the coverage indicator. So be sure to think about that one. All right, Preston, I'll hand it over to you to close us out before we get into some questions, but I hope there's hopefully some more questions that popped up.
Yeah, hi everyone. So as we've kind of discussed, 3R supports a lot of folks with their EcoVadis assessments. That can be through a variety of things. So I think our most common is to do a gap assessment to understand your current practices against the methodology and sort of see what could we do in the short term to improve your score or advance your program in general. And then typically we support the submission itself. So that kind of package deal is most common, I would say. We take the submission completely off your hands, and we're proud to say that we have an average of 15-point improvements after working with a company for the first time. So definitely an effective route. If you're, oh yeah, okay. If you're maybe not ready to launch, there was a few folks that were doing a first time submission. We have a readiness assessment that allows us to dig in and see kind of where you're at in the process, and if we think you're ready to submit, get a baseline. And then the other one I'll mention is the submission review. So if you feel like you have it well in-house, you've done a lot of this before, but you want a third party to just kind of look and see what high level things we think you could improve on, that submission review is a good start. We also help with policy development and support. And finally, supplier engagement. If you're using EcoVadis to track risk in your supply chain and it's feeling overwhelming or you're not getting great engagement or uptick in that. We support some clients on the requesting company side and can act as part of your team and really support with that program and educate your suppliers. So doing something like this, but specifically with your supply chain and tailored to your industry. Yeah, we support in several languages: Spanish, French, Mandarin, I think more, and primarily English. Anything else you want to add, Josh, before we move forward?
That was well summarized.
Great. Yeah, so all of our clients have improved their score working with us, and like I said, 15 point is average. Another proud thing, 12% of all American platinum companies we have worked with. Okay, moving along. We are offering a complimentary EcoVadis scorecard review. So we have some limited spots. We can't help all of you on the call, but if you're interested in signing up, what this would mean is basically we would look at your scoring matrix. So we wouldn't have access to any private documentation or anything like that, just your score. And we would be able to kind of give high level feedback on where we think you should focus on first and what that might look like. So also happy to sign NDAs and stuff if everything's simple enough. But typically we don't get anything private. So feel free to sign up for this using the QR code or just send Josh an email and we would love to talk to you.
Leave this up for a couple more seconds just in case people are scrambling for their phone.
Yeah, maybe I'll send your email in the chat too so people can copy that. Awesome.
Thanks. All right, let's get into the questions.
Yeah, we can keep this slide up. Okay. Yeah, I feel keep the QR code. Let people do that if they want. Okay, I think maybe we ended up answering this a little bit after, but asking about if quantitative targets need to be public.
Yeah, it's a great question. They do not need to be public. There's definitely best practice is to make as many of them public as you can. But from a EcoVadis scoring perspective, there's no difference whether it's public or private commitment.
Great. And then similar on the scoring question, someone asked, how do they know if the new climate risk has no scoring impact? Is that publicly declared?
It is. It's actually really kind of confusing in the questionnaire itself because at the top it shows a high impact. If you think of like those bubbles, you can picture that. It does show a high impact there, but from the methodology updates that EcoVadis provides, it is noted that there's no score impact for that question. So it is publicly available. And if you want to access the scoring methodology or any methodology updates, you do have access to that. It's part of the Help Center. So if you just sign into your account, go to the Help Center. Towards the bottom, you can see any product updates and you can see any methodology updates. Product updates come out a bit more frequently. Methodology updates come out every quarter.
Okay, another one about sharing the rating if they get a medal. There needs to be a certain level of subscription. Is that correct? Yes.
Yes, yeah. If you want to share externally, when I say externally, that's outside of the EcoVadis platform, you do have to have the premium subscription or higher. The basic subscription does not allow you to download the medal or use it in any way.
Great. And then someone asked if you could expand on third-party assurance boosting score.
Yeah, I can. So there's two indicators that this supports. The first one I'll touch on is coverage. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the way the coverage indicator methodology works is it's based on what percent coverage of a specific certification I'll use as an example here. you have throughout your facilities. So using ISO 14001 as an example here. If you don't have assurance, third-party assurance on the data point, I don't have the exact numbers top of mind, but say you have 40% of your facilities have ISO 14001. That would get you a score of 50. But if you had assurance and your data point was assured and you had a certification, the same number of facilities had the certification, you may be eligible for the next score. You may be eligible for a 75. So it just lowers the criteria level of what you need to do to get to the next level if that data point is assured. So I hope that was clear. Feel free to follow up on that if that wasn't. And then the second area it's helpful is the reporting indicator, where assurance is a requirement to get a score of 100. Without third-party assurance, your top score you can get is 75. So typically this looks like having a sustainability report, including an external facing sustainability report, incorporating all of your data into it, and then having your sustainability report be assured. You could also go the route of greenhouse gas assurance if you wanted to specifically go that route. That is also an option.
Okay, we had someone ask about CDP survey impacting this course. So if they move away from CDP and no longer include it, if that has a score impact.
Yeah, so no score impact from CDP. It is one of the questions, but it's one of the questions that is not part of the scoring criteria methodology.
Although sometimes we use it as evidence for other indicators. So if you're
Yes.
using it elsewhere, that would be good too.
Yes, that's a good point. That you would need to kind of extract that information into an alternative document and utilize that a different piece of evidence for it.
Okay, keep them coming. We have a few more. You mentioned that EcoVadis is moving away from the four themes to ESG. In the past, sustainable procurement was one of the tougher categories, according to EcoVadis. Will there be less emphasis on this theme in the future, or will it simply be repositioned?
Yeah, I'm really happy this question came through because I feel like I wasn't very clear on this earlier. The four themes are not going away. So sustainable procurement is still going to be in place. The scoring methodology is going to be the same. Where the difference is, Preston, I'm getting some feedback. If you wouldn't mind muting. Thanks. The main difference is that there will now be a mapping to ESG. So nothing's really changing. It's just additional information that you'll have access to.
Right. Sorry, I had a question in Spanish. I was doing a quick translation. Looks like there's some questions, I think, on when there's questions about like percentage of all people trained on environmental risks.
Mm-hmm.
They use documentation that talks about the training, but it doesn't give the actual percentages.
Right.
This is a common
Yeah.
knowledge, yeah.
Yeah. This is really common. We see this with many of our companies we work with for the first time.
Maybe you can explain the question a little bit better. I think we just did some
Yeah.
in the weeds, but yeah.
Sure. So I think the question here is about when you're responding to quantitative questions, so either reporting or coverage questions. EcoVadis is looking for very specific data points. If you upload just the materials of what you're doing, you won't get credit for that question, because what you're doing that falls under the different indicator, that falls under the measures indicator. So that would be perfectly acceptable there. But within reporting and coverage, they want to see the quantitative, the actual numbers in the document itself. So I mentioned earlier about centralizing your data. I highly recommend doing that, whether that be in an internal PowerPoint or an external sustainability report. highly recommend doing that centralization, and that way you can report out specifically on the quantitative, specifically on the numbers that you have.
Great. I think we got all the questions. If there's any final ones before we wrap up? And got a handful of emails on the complimentary scorecard, so that's exciting. If anyone else wants to put their name in, please do. And while we wrap, I actually have one last poll, everyone. I almost forgot. So, any learnings today? If you have any top priorities after listening, please share. And then two, I'll mention there will be a survey that's sent out after this. I think it might show up on here and probably get emailed to you as well. We'd love your feedback on anything today in general, and if there are any specific topics you want us to cover in the future. And then in that survey, you can also indicate if you want us to reach out. Or of course you can email us or put something in the chat, and we'd love to have a call with you. Okay, there was one last question where people are doing the poll. If it would be useful to have a document like a ESG fact sheet if they're not ready for a full report. I think that's a great option. So something like a management review deck, yeah.
Yes, yeah, totally acceptable. I do advise not putting it in Excel. EcoVadis tends to be a little bit less lenient with Excel. So I do recommend formatting it in a way of it being more of a report, or a report out to the management team. But totally acceptable to do an internal type of document.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we just recommend using it for more than just EcoVadis. Have it be a utilized document more generally. All right, I'm going to share the results honestly across the board, but it sounds like people are really trying to understand EcoVadis's expectations and address scorecard gaps, and maybe a bit of learning on document quality. So that's great. All right, we'll wrap it at that. I'm going to close the poll and maybe put that one up. Yeah, great. So please complete our survey and come to a future event. Thank you all for your time today.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.